Open banking. Let's do another thumbs up, thumbs down. Who's heard of it? Well, that's good, because you're in the right place to hear more. Open banking is an unbelievable innovation that's coming to the financial services sector. It's unbelievable because people are scared of it, banks and others, and unbelievable because of the individual, the rights, the competition, the access to financial services it could bring to many. And also like to think of, for you to think of it like the internet once was built, where the technology came out and nobody could have imagined where the internet was taken, all the innovations that happened on top of the technical delivery of the internet. I'd like to really welcome the panel that we've assembled today of experts in this area. Firstly, we've got Sherry Munden, who has really been working many, many years with the largest banks in Australia and has developed a point of view around trust and how banks are really earning back trust and are engaging in open banking. We've got Daniel McAuliffe, who's actually sits on the Treasury and advisor, sitting actually creating the bills and advising Treasury on what it is that open banking will deliver. Peter Laylaw from Money Brilliant, founder and CEO of a PFM tool and financial engagement tool that really stands to benefit from open banking, deliver financial wellness to Australians. And Alex Trott, who runs financial services for Accenture, obviously advising and helping banks and others with the open banking movement. So I'm going to start, we're going to have quite an interactive panel. The goal here is to really think about the two speeds of open banking. One is just getting beyond that compliance hurdle. The dates moved once was July 2019, now it's been moved to February and longer for non-Big Four banks, really to get, firstly to address that and then move beyond to what could be the innovation possible from open banking. Firstly, Sherry, having worked with the large banks here in Australia, talk to us about the context of trust and how banks will be addressing trust personally as opposed to trust as brands.
Well, I think from a banking perspective, how the different banks look at trust is really quite interesting. So how do you articulate trust? If trust has been lost, and they say that 47% of customers actually don't trust their banks, then how do you regain that trust? So internally, we did a piece of work where we looked at the elements of trust. And I just want to share some of the pieces of work. So when you split out trust, there's three basic parts of trust. So the first area is competence. So can you actually deliver on what you're saying? So that's the first element. The second one is credibility. So can you consistently deliver what you say you want to deliver to the consumer? And the third part is the character. Are you actually an agency for good in terms of you as a bank, you as an organization? So if you look at trust in those three ways, what are the examples that I'm seeing and we're seeing across the bank? So when we look at credibility, a lot of that focus is on compliance. So everybody says, well, for my credibility, I need to make sure that we're compliant as an organization. But you can't actually see compliance when you're a consumer. And then when you look at competence, like can you do something, in terms of character, let me just go to character first. If you look at character, most of the character in terms of who we are a force for good as a bank, is all done typically through marketing and marketing efforts. But people are finding marketing efforts and personalization efforts a bit hollow. They're not really truly connecting with that. So if you look at the last area, the competence area, that's really the area I think that banks can make a difference. So that's really about creating and innovating around deeper connections, that whole customer experience, and making sure that when you design solutions or you design products for the marketplace, you're actually creating these micro events where you're actually building trust a piece at a time as you build up that trust with that customer. So those are some of the things that I've seen across the banking.
So using micro moments to assist customer, in ways going to them, push notifications, ways that actually help them based on transactions and things that we're
absolutely, because it's traditionally it's been one way. The power has been with the banks, and that's now flipped. When you look at the situation today, the power is now with the consumer. You look at open banking, and people be able to move around a lot easier. Those capabilities and that ability to create those micro moments and that level of trust is going to be even more important for banks.
Thanks, Sherry. Daniel, just reflecting on that, you've been involved pre-legislation productivity commission. What were the visions of open banking for consumers, for banks, for society?
Yeah. So I suppose maybe I'll take a step back.
Okay.
So we've been talking about open banking, but the open banking initiative is actually part of a broader initiative called the Consumer Data Right. And so what the consumer data right is really, it's giving consumers, and when we say consumers, we mean individuals, but also business customers, the rights to access data held by other businesses. Not only that, but also being able to tell that business, I want you to give real-time, ongoing, machine-readable access to a third party. So for example, the consumer data right for banking, that's called open banking, you could have this idea where I could go to my bank and I could say to my bank, I want you to give access to this comparison website, access to my credit card transaction details for the last 12 months. Just give them access for the next couple of hours. And so it seems quite simple, but it's actually got some profound effects on how markets and how businesses can operate. So what are we trying to get out of this? So the most obvious use case that people raise, as a potential benefit is enhancements to the ability of customers to go and identify better products, to assess those products against their own individual circumstances, and then streamline ways to actually select and switch to those products. So the obvious case is this selection process. So to run an example, that comparison website example, I could go to the comparison website. The first thing is that comparison website under open banking could access every single credit card on offer by every bank in Australia. So open banking forced banks to make all those product data available in machine-readable format. And then I could tell that comparison website, okay, you've got access to these thousands of credit cards. Find the one that best suits me for my use of credit cards. And so I give that comparison website access to my credit card transaction history solely for that purpose. And they can actually then work out, okay, considering how you use your credit card, this is the best product for you. So that's the one that has been most talked about, because if you actually do the numbers, even a 1% increase in switching by consumers in mortgages, credit cards, etc., for every 1%, it works out to be hundreds of millions of dollars of savings to consumers, right? So if you have like 10%, that's billions of savings, big numbers, right? But that's not the only potential uses. You also have there's also potentially just completely new goods and services that can be offered that are driven by that new data. Things like budgeting apps. So either goods and services relating to those underlying products, like the credit card, or things like banking data is full of behavioural information. So there might be completely different types of goods and services that unrelated to banking that could be created feeding off those data sets. Then there's all these potential benefits from improving business processes. If you take the simplest example, automatic form filling, even that, the potential savings in the economy are huge. But there could be all sorts of other business efficiency savings. And then the other one is regulatory compliance. So I don't know whether you've been paying attention to the Banking Royal Commission, but certainly at Treasury we have been. There's a lot of talk about the responsible lending obligations of banks. And at the moment they sort of just use these standard assumptions about income and expenditure from people. Yep. And they get it wrong, right? They lend to people who should not be lent money. And so there's been talking about how do you actually get banks to actually use real income, real expenses. And there's been a lot of talk about, well, open banking is an opportunity. You can use open banking. I can go to my new bank and I can say, okay, you have access to all my transaction data from all my previous banks, and they can actually work out what my expenses income is. Not only that, but using their FinTech, their mathematical magic, they can actually sort of get insights into how much I spend on groceries and how much I spend on restaurants and all those sorts of things. So they can break it down into far more insightful views of that data. And the last thing I think where we see with the consumer data right and open banking is like there's that saying that data is the new oil. And access to data sets is it's not enough, but it's a precondition for us having a vibrant data economy in Australia. And this is one way of giving access to that data. Now, one thing about the consumer data right is it is consent driven. So it is a right for consumers to access their data or to share their data with someone else. It is not a right for the businesses to share data without the consumer's consent. And this sort of feeds into this trust issue.
Yep.
So it's a consent-based mechanism. There are risks. We're talking about high velocity access to high value data in real time, convenient. There are risks there. People will. There's risks of misuse of the data. So we've got risks. We've got a system which will only work if people actually agree to use it. And so at the end of the day, they've got to have trust and they've got to have confidence in the system.
So as I'm listening to this, Daniel, that was an amazing overview. I'm imagining that a lot of people in this audience are both going to be members of the financial industry, but also individuals themselves who may be going for loans themselves thinking, wow, like one day I did fill out a form and that had the advantage of benefit of the doubt, and sometimes I might be, as a borrower, the beneficiary of some of those expenditure estimates. I can only see credit tightening in a post-open banking world when things are more accurate, but the question is, go on, sorry.
Well, I think the thing is that with less information, what happens is cross-subsidisation is going on.
Nice, yep.
So if I'm a risky borrower, and you're a less risky borrower, at the moment we might get the same interest rate. And if we're moving into a world with better access to data, then that does say something about how these markets work, right? And some of it may be very good. It means I'm not cross-subsidising you, or vice versa. But there are things you have to really ask yourself, what does it mean? There is some social good to some of that cross-subsidisation.
Yep.
Right? And not only that, but in terms of what does it do to the balance of power? So it's not information asymmetry is not the only thing, right? There's capability to take advantage of the data, right? There's capacity, there's behavioural biases by consumers, right? And it is a very interesting issue about the extent to which improved data access will feed into those sort of factors.
So Daniel, Money Brilliant, is here on this panel and has been playing a role for some time in improving people's awareness and engagement with their finances. So maybe, Peter, if you can help us understand the vision of Money Brilliant, how you actually help people in a world of transparency.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stuart. That's a really good segue, I guess, into a bit of an explanation as to what we do. As a FinTech startup, we've been operating now for about 4 or 5 years, helping Australians...
I think you've gone.
People aren't no hearing.
How's that? Hear that?
Yeah.
Yep, good. Okay, let me start again. So a good segue into, I guess, a bit of an explanation as to what Money Brilliant does. For the last 4 or 5 years as a FinTech startup business, we've been using customer data to help them make better decisions about how they spend their money. And there's lots of different ways you can look at this problem. One piece of research that's a little bit old now, but probably the best source of data that we've got, suggests that Australians waste about $12 billion a year on products and services they don't need, or remaining with product and service suppliers that are no longer able to provide them with the best product or service. And so one way of looking at what we're trying to do, I guess, is help consumers find that waste and change their purchasing decisions to get better value for their money, in the hope that if they spend less, they can save more. If they save more, they can do more with their lives, they can have a better life. And so for us, open banking is a massive opportunity, because we've been working to try and do this for the last 4 or 5 years in the absence of open banking, in an environment where getting product data is incredibly difficult, sometimes by design, I think. And if you can get it, it's generally not in a standardized format, which makes comparability really, really difficult. And then getting access to customer data, so transactional data often, is really difficult as well. So for us, open banking will actually open all of that up, make our business, I guess, much more efficient, but also create opportunities within the economy, I think, for other businesses to do the sorts of things that we're doing as well. And just to give you, I guess, a bit of a sense of some of the complexity that we deal with without the open banking or without the consumer data right in place today. If you look at energy, for example, and we work in the energy space, we're probably one of the few personal financial management apps that today operates across banking, energy, and hopefully soon telecommunications. If you live in the Sydney area, there are over 1,000 different electricity plans that you could elect to purchase as a consumer. And I challenge any of you to actually find the time, amongst the other things that you have to do in your life, to actually properly evaluate all 1,000 electricity plans and make the best possible decision about which electricity plan that you should have. In order for us to do that today, we have to collect the data for 1,000 electricity plans. We then have to get consumers to give us their electricity usage data, and then we run the algorithms and the comparisons to come back to them with a suggestion about which electricity plan they'd be best off having. In an open banking and a consumer data right world, we'll be able to virtually instantly access all of the details for those 1,000 electricity plans, and through open energy, get access to the customer's electricity usage data. And so it fundamentally changes, I think, competition and transparency in the economy. And they're just examples, I guess, outside financial services. We do the same things today for credit cards, savings accounts, transaction accounts, and mortgages. And so really what we're trying to do is use customer data, that product data that I've talked about, and AI analytics and so on to actually help consumers make better decisions about how they spend their money.
Fantastic, Peter. I think, Alex, from an Accenture standpoint, you'd be helping many of the banks get ready for open banking. How are they perceiving open banking? And I guess the following question to consider is, how are you attempting to get mindshare for the innovation versus complying or getting ready for day one?
No, it's there's certainly a lot of complexity out there in terms of what open banking is and how different organizations are perceiving it. Obviously, the industry is still determining all of the various regulations and guidelines around some of those things. And I think it's the challenge for organizations is working out what they can do now without worrying about some of those changes coming along. So what the sort of no regrets actions are versus those other activities on top. So I see the activities falling into two different camps really. One, that compliance, what do I need to do to be compliant? And that's very much around the sort of API infrastructure you need to put in place, the way in which you can share data, where a lot of the focus is. But what we've just talked about is a lot of data as well. And I think many organizations are struggling in general with their data governance around customer data, how they manage that. And actually, as we start to hear, if consumers want banks, for example, to share data for a certain period of time, or so giving consent but then removing consent, there needs to be a very complex process around that put in place, which frankly most of the banks are not capable of implementing right now, given the complexity of their systems and processes and data governance around that. So I think the data side of it is big. But all of that is the sort of the compliance side to it. The key here, and what we've seen, especially around the world in terms of other examples with open banking, is the opportunity. And the opportunity for banks in the short term, but also the broader financial services market, to think about how they can create new business models, how they can think of new use cases or white space within the market that becomes accessible by having access to this data. And that's the other area where again, many organizations are just focusing on the compliance, but actually if you start to think about the opportunities around it, starting to innovate around new use cases, thinking about ways in which you can leverage that data, looking around the world at other examples, there's a massive opportunity in the market in Australia actually to take advantage of that. And And we've seen there is first mover advantage in these things as well. So getting the market share, getting out there with those things, you're exactly a good example where you need that mind share early and to really think about those use cases. So thinking about how to present that to consumers, consumers in the survey that we did generally don't understand open banking and haven't necessarily heard of it. I don't think it's going to be something that banks or other organizations sell. It's like open banking is going to be irrelevant. It's the use case, it's the way in which you use that data to create something that's relevant, and therefore starting that innovation process within the organizations to work out how to leverage that is the other first step.
If we think about open banking for a moment, I think all of the use cases and narrative we've heard seems to be about banks giving over data to third parties. I think that it's predicated on that, but also can't banks themselves be recipients from other banks to create a more compelling picture? And therefore, I can see a structural change in that if a bank itself can only show its own product's relationship with its clients, then why would a client continue using a single bank's website or app? And I just want to get your feeling for a statement I'm going to make to say that every bank will become an aggregator to continue to do business.
Maybe I could jump in.
Yeah.
So there's a number of different ways this would go, and it doesn't, and different banks could go different ways. So there is the world where I go to my bank, and my bank also provides, aggregates data on my energy and gives me suggestions on my best electricity bill, and is a bit of an aggregator. There's another world where the bank may just be the wholesale provider, and that a lot of sort of the client interfaces occur with other organisations. There's the sort of the partnership model, and you can see that with, I won't name the bank, but there's a bank in Australia already which is very quite far down the open banking road voluntarily, and you can see all these sort of cooperative arrangements with various service providers. So their customers are actually getting sort of a suite of different product services from a suite of different people, and that bank is providing services itself. Part of going with that bank is you have access to all these other wonderful third-party resources.
I might make a couple of comments as well, Stuart. I think you've touched on an issue which is a really, really profound issue in financial services around vertical integration, and to what extent does vertical integration continue to break down? And I say continue to break down because there's little doubt that it's been breaking down over the last decade or so anyway. And obviously it was a big topic of discussion in the Royal Commission as well, around best interests of customers and conflicts of interest and so on. So, I think directionally, there's no doubt that open banking and the consumer data right more generally will continue to break down vertical integration. And I think in terms of direction, there's no doubt in my mind that it will continue to empower and strengthen businesses that operate at the distribution end of the value chain. Because if you're a product manufacturer, of credit cards, for example, how would you feel about every single consumer in Australia being able to instantly run the numbers on whether your credit card offer today is the best offer in the market, and then at some point in the future instantly switch from a suboptimal card to a better card? That's a really, really, I think, challenging space for a product manufacturer. So unless you provide the best possible product, you can't really hope to win in that sort of environment. So I think the power will start to shift a little bit more toward distribution. That'll be brought about by open banking and consumer data right.
Could I ask a question? So in the future, with Money Brilliant, will I be able to have my Money Brilliant app, and it will tell me one day that my Commonwealth Bank credit card isn't the best card anymore, and that prompting me to switch to NAB?
It's a great question, and it wasn't a plan because we do that already. The only qualification
then can I click the button and you switch it for me? right?
The second bit's a bit harder. If Treasury would actually implement legislation to allow electronic switching and fix some identity management issues that we've got, we'd be able to do that. But the reality is today, we actually will tell consumers when we think the credit card, savings account, transaction account, home loan, electricity plan or gas plan that they're currently using is not the cheapest option for them. So, and I emphasize the word cheapest because we're not trying to provide advice or a recommendation about what the best product for you is, because there's a whole bunch of other factors I think that need to get taken into account in order to make a recommendation about the best product. But we're certainly out there today actually making suggestions to customers that are worth millions and millions of dollars every day about switching potentially to cheaper products.
And I think this is exactly to this point. The open banking will start to allow transparency, and what you're talking about here is especially pricing transparency.
Yeah.
And the pricing transparency, therefore, will allow consumers to choose and get some level of prompting around price. The question then is, in that distribution space, how do you differentiate? Because consumers are willing to pay more for good service or for additional services. And therefore, the differentiation of the APR rate on the credit card, or whether it gives 1 or 2 frequent flyer points or whatever per dollar, those things will become the baseline. And it will be the additional service of what you can get through your financial products in the ecosystem that you're working on there. So it's the service that you get, not just on one product, but a suite of products. And I think your point around the boundaries and the gap between the manufacturers and the distributors will become greater. And almost basically going back to Stuart's question and answering in the end, all banks becoming aggregators, I don't think there's enough space in the market for all banks to become ecosystems and aggregators. There will be very few winners because scale in that ecosystem play really is important. And therefore, it's a race to become the aggregator in some ways. It's not the fact that there's space for everyone.
And the remaining banks become manufacturers of products.
Or irrelevant.
Wholesale, yeah.
Or irrelevant, exactly. Yeah.
I think the other thing I think that's really interesting and profound about this is, we've and probably in this audience, we've had these conversations about, the power of things like big data, analytics, artificial intelligence. But we've only ever had those conversations as providing benefits from all those sorts of things to businesses. And I think the really profound thing about the consumer data right and open banking is that actually it'll start to shift the power that's available from these sorts of things back to the consumer. So the tables could be turned. It'll no longer be a case where big business can just use big data, analytics, AI to target consumers with offers that are at best in the interest of the business and the consumer. My view is that customer champion or customer advocate businesses will start to emerge that actually start to use those things to actually benefit consumers and help consumers actually cut through the enormous, complexity and sort of proliferation of product and service offers that exist in the market that make it really difficult as a consumer to make good purchasing decisions today. And I think that'll be a really profound change.
So it's interesting from historically when you talk about the efficiency of markets, you would talk about things like information, lack of information, right? That's not the problem these days, right? The problem is the usability of the information, the volume of the information, the complexity of the information. And really at the heart of this open banking thing is that you need, at a point you stop and you think, I as a consumer need help. And this is what the consumer data is about.
Correct.
It's about, okay, I can't make sense of that information. I'm getting someone else, someone who's not my bank.
Or maybe my
bank saying, give me help, help me understand this.
I mean, I personally, I think banks have actually missed a trick here because if you look at what's happened to banking in this country, virtually every major bank has bought a big wealth management business sometime in the last couple of decades, and they focused on big picture strategic investment advice and retirement planning advice and all these sort of complicated needs that some consumers have, but very few of them have actually focused on helping consumers make better decisions every day about how they spend their money.
Yeah.
And actually, I think we'll start to see a big shift in sort of strategic focus of banks and financial institutions back to that opportunity. For two reasons. One is I think it's actually what people need. There's not too many people walking the streets of Sydney with $100,000 in their pocket just looking for a complicated asset allocation and investment strategy. But they could all make better decisions about how they spend their money. And secondly, I think if as a financial institution you can actually help people make better decisions about how you spend your money day to day, then you can actually build a relationship with customers over a period of time that builds trust, that actually then gives you the authority or the permission to help them with those bigger, more strategic things. And what's more, you can probably help make sure that they can afford to actually implement those strategies when the time comes as well. So I think we'll see a shift back towards those sorts of things.
I think there's a bit of a fear factor as well when you start thinking about consumers wanting to share their data. Some people are more confident than others. Yep. And I think getting them and moving them away from fear and getting them into that trust is going to take some time. And I think from a banking perspective, how you take that data in when you're looking at open banking and the use of ethics is going to increasingly become much more important when people talk about big data. Do people feel confident that that organisation, that bank is ethically using my information, and therefore I will give you more, I will share more, and therefore I will trust you with my financial arrangements and to give me advice?
It's interesting. I think it's the Accenture survey that shows banks are the people trust their data with, right? And this was a survey taken at the height of the Banking Royal Commission.
Correct. And this is it talks to what's going on in the whole industry around data and data privacy, with a number of the big platforms that are out there that have had data issues as well. But 90% plus of consumers still trust banks with their money. You know, they still say, I will put my money in a bank because I believe it's safe. The question is, they don't necessarily trust them, and they do trust them with their data because that's sort of in that way as well, and that's something certainly not to lose. The question of trust is where it starts to come to advice, and actually, do I trust the bank to give me the best advice to how to manage my money? And at this stage, that figure is very low indeed.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a big difference between I trust the bank as a sort of repository or vault of my data versus I trust my bank to actually use my data to help me make better decisions or to provide me with advice or suggestions or recommendations. I think there's a massive difference there.
So Peter, I wish this panel could go all day, because all I needed to do was set the Tinder alight and this thing could burn on forever. And for those of you that got scanned, and we want to carry this on with more depthful webinars, more depthful conversations and papers, because open banking is going to change this industry and adjacent industries. Salesforce provides the infrastructure via API and MuleSoft, the innovation capability via Heroku, and then of course knowing your customer better by our core CRM platform. What I'll ask each of you is, if you're a bank sitting in the audience or contemplating open banking, what would be your sort of one piece of advice to continue to be intimate, continue to deliver valuable service? And Peter, just please be honest, and if you're a bank, clearly you're not, in this advice, just to wrap us up, thanks.
So from my perspective, I think people, when they're dealing with banks, trust individuals. They don't actually trust the bank. So how do you translate that relationship that says, I trust that individual banker, to I trust that brand, I trust that bank? And I think there's a good piece of work to be done there. And if we can get that translation piece done, that's where the successful banks will be.
Nice.
So I think it was something that you mentioned before, that these micro events.
Yep.
I think there's so much, that's an area that should, you can really see fostering trust, right? The fact that my bank sends me an email telling me that, if I don't move some money from my one account into my credit card, I'll end up paying them more money at the end of that month. Those sorts of little events can actually really help engender trust.
Can I give you two really quick ones?
Yes.
So two suggestions or two tips. I think in financial services, and I've been in financial services for the past couple of decades, so I can include myself in this. I think we've talked a lot about customer centricity, customer focus, but I don't actually think that we've practically done a lot about it. My suggestion is that open banking and the consumer data right actually gives us an opportunity now like we've never had before to put customers at the centre of what we do. So take that opportunity. And then my second tip would be really scared. because this is not about open banking. This is about the consumer data right. And there's a group of probably financial services people sitting here listening to this. But if you're a telecommunications company or a product manufacturer or a consumer goods company, why wouldn't you be sitting there thinking about the opportunities that open banking and consumer data right will give your business to actually, I hate the term, but I'll use it just for exaggeration, own the relationship with a customer and help that customer make better decisions about their financial services products. And in fact, we can probably all imagine big tech companies, not our friends at Salesforce, but others, who would also be sitting there thinking about, gosh, what sort of power does this data give me to build deeper, better, stronger relationships with customers that might disintermediate their financial services providers?
I suppose there's a lot of sort of strategic talking around there. My suggestion's a little bit more immediate, which is how do you join up the various parts of your organization that are thinking about open banking? So you've got some people in the data space, you've got some in the infrastructure, you've got your strategy team thinking about those things. The question is, all of these things are related to create that one sort of roadmap for how you embrace and actually make the most of open banking. Look, you don't necessarily always need to engage a consultant to come and help with that, so it's not a pitch there. But there's some frameworks, and for us, there's 10 things or 10 areas of the organization that we would suggest you look at, different capabilities that you need. You may choose to do some, you may not choose to do others, and happy to share that with anyone that wants to have a look at that as well.
Well, everyone, again, we could have gone for hours. It's a fascinating topic. Please join us at 2 for the keynote with Volt, Australia's first authorised digital bank. And Money Brilliant have a promo. I saw some of you taking photos. I'll leave that shot up there to get a free access to the capability. I use it. It gives me suggestions to when even to fill up my car, which has saved me a lot of money already. And please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you.